Business page.
Just last year, a report from the Women and Girls Foundation and Allegheny County's Department of Human Service showed that in Pittsburgh, 77% of the households living in poverty were headed by single women with children. The foundation decided to do something about that, do something to change it. And over the next 3 years, the Women and Girls Foundation will invest more than $1 million per year in programs aimed at breaking down these economic barriers. Funding partners for this project are the Henry L. Hillman Foundation, the Buell Foundation, and the Opportunity Fund. We are joined by two guests this morning. Heather Arnet is the CEO of the Women and Girls Foundation. Rochelle Jackson is director of Femisphere, that initiative. Ladies, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. Heather, let me start with you. What does the foundation aim to achieve? What do you want to do? What do you want to change? I assume probably you'd like to be out of business at some point, right?
Well, certainly, our goal with Femisphere is to create a world where women and girls thrive. And that's why we've called it Femisphere, so that we can imagine creating an entire ecosystem that has everything women and girls need, right? So that means access to transportation and good education and workforce development and workforce opportunities. And for single moms, that especially means I need to have childcare and transportation if you want me to be able to have access to a higher ed opportunity or a workforce opportunity. So that's what Femisphere is about. It's about thinking about putting that single mom at the center of those conversations and then making sure that there's a whole universe, a whole ecosystem around her that's supporting her so she's not alone.
And the realization that childcare may not be between 9 and 5 Monday through Friday, correct?
That's right. So one piece of the Femisphere this stage is we're partnering with Pacey, and one piece of it is they're going to be doing a survey to look at, well, what is available right now for moms who don't work 9 to 5. Right. So as we all know, we've really moved into a service economy. A lot of folks are working in retail, they're working in big box retail or for fast food or in healthcare or at our hospitals. They're custodians, they're guards, they're nurses, and they aren't working 9 to 5. And so we need to make sure that children have a safe and wonderful place to be when their moms are at work. And for a lot of moms, that means not 9 to 5. And so Pacey will be looking at how can we make sure that all moms and kids have a good place to go.
Right. Rochelle, what exactly, when you say the word Femisphere, what does it mean to you? Well, what does that mean to you?
That means, for me, that means a world where women have all that they need for them and their children to thrive. Being a single mom myself, I know what the struggle is like, trying to raise the children and rise above poverty. And so for me, that means an environment that actually focuses, an atmosphere that focuses just on women and their children, which is something that I never found as a single mom. And so for me, it's a dream, it's just a dream come true. To have an environment that actually says we focus on a lot of different communities, whether it's homeless, whether it's low-income people in general, but this is the one time that we have an initiative that's going to just focus on moms, single moms, and their children. And so,
if there was one thing that you could say, boy, I wish I could give every woman who's dealing with these issues, if there was one thing you could give, what would be the biggest thing? What would be the first thing that you would provide?
One thing that I could give all single moms would be, I guess, access to resources. There are a wealth of resources. A lot of people would say in our community, in Allegheny County. I think part of the problem is that we are such a diverse community, or it's such a diverse county, that we have folks kind of scattered all over the place. So the one thing that if I could give them would be a way to access those resources in a real, stress-free kind of one-stop shop kind of a way. I mean, and so that could be in a lot of different forms, but I think that's part of the, Heather and I were just talking about all the different things that single moms have to do in order to get the resources that they need, and that in and of itself is very stressful. And then you add to that working and taking care of the children. So I think that would be the one thing that if I could give them that one thing, it would be some sort of mechanism that would allow them to access those resources and not have to duplicate. You go one here to get, you have to go here and duplicate, then you have to go over there, and that in and of itself I think is very taxing and stressing for single moms.
Heather, is there still a stigma attached there of being a single mom, of not having a husband, not having a partner that you're going through that with? Is that something that women are dealing with too?
Well, we talk a lot at the office about how, as Rochelle said, there have been a number of initiatives, here in our own community looking at the issue of poverty, but often people will talk about a neighborhood, or they might talk about children, they might talk about families, they might talk about even race, but they rarely talk about gender. And when we talk about children, we're talking about mothers. And we think it's important to keep remembering that 77% of households living in poverty are single mother households, because if we really do care about children, and I know that all of us do, then we need to be caring about moms too. And these moms are working really hard trying to make sure their kids are safe and they have food on the table and they have a safe place to live and that everyone gets to school on time and that they're able to find a job. And that's really stressful when most of our moms don't even have access to a paid sick day.
So what are your biggest needs? What are the biggest needs that you have as an organization right now?
Oh, well, many ways to create a Femisphere, we need all of us to get involved. So one of the things that Rochelle will be doing as the director is, certainly going out into communities so that moms themselves know about the project and know about our partners and what they can offer them. But also, we really want to challenge everyone to take a Femisphere pledge, so that every organization, every piece of government, every corporation, every person can say, okay, well, here's what I'll do. Right? So maybe what you'll do is mentor a young woman, and maybe what somebody else will do is they'll say, you know what, my small business doesn't have paid family leave, and I'm going to figure out how to make that happen. All of us can do something to make this world a Femisphere.
Rochelle, what about transportation? How important is that as part of the equation right now?
It's absolutely critical. Without transportation, this is impossible to achieve. It just doesn't happen. And we've had our struggles as a county with public transportation, and there are transportation deserts where there are moms who are just kind of stuck. I was just talking to someone who there's a housing community out in Penn Hills who has absolutely no public transportation at all. And so I think that's where the government and bringing folks together, to the table to talk about how do we strategize around that, you know what I mean? Because there's in one way we're moving moms into, safe, affordable housing in Penn Hills, but did we consider the fact that that housing also moves them
somewhere else?
Absolutely, and connect them to the resources that they need. So I think it's just really creating a comprehensive, integrative system, where the resources are available and really making moms the center of that.
Yeah, well, ladies, thank you very much for helping us to think about those sorts of issues and for the work that you're doing right now. We very much appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
Well, still to come this morning, we've got a little bit more on the Sunday Business page because in just a couple of minutes, we'll wrap things up. So thanks so much for starting your Sunday with us.